Hey, so I'm not here today. Obviously, my older son Charlie is home with a fever, and so I am home with my older son Charlie. But I wanted to get up really early to come into North so that I could record a little video of myself talking to you about everybody's favorite book, The Scarlet Letter. Now, the downside to teaching this book is I have not one, not two, not three, but four different versions of this text, right? So if you are in a class which does not have this version, you're just going to have to pretend that you're looking at your book. Okay? So I will be back tomorrow. Please read chapters 6 and 7 for tomorrow, and we'll talk about it then. So chapters 4 and 5 are about a couple different things. Chapter 4 takes place immediately after Hester left the scaffold for part 1 of her punishment, right? And she had to go back to the prison that night, and she was pretty shaken that she'd seen her husband, from England in the back of the crowd, and he had put his finger up to her lips, remember, his lips. And then that night, she is back in prison with with her daughter, and daughter is screaming and crying, and she can't get her to stop. And husband, whose name we find out now is Roger Chillingworth, comes to visit her. So when he first shows up, he brings some medicine or something kind of a soothing potion for the baby to drink, and the baby drinks it and immediately goes to sleep. Hester was initially kind of frightened that he might try to be hurting the baby, right, and give her something to mess the baby up, but he said, I'm not going to take out my revenge on the baby, and even though this baby is not mine, this potion would be good enough as if it were for my own child. Then he also has something for Hester to drink. And Hester is skeptical of this, and at least in this book, the bottom page 69, she said, I've often thought of death, have wished for it, would have even prayed for it, were it fit for, as I should pray for anything. Yet, if death be in this cup, I bid thee think again, ere thou beholdest me quaff it. See, it is even now at my lips. So she said, look, there have been times I've even thought about dying, maybe even wished for it in the, regards to this punishment I'm undergoing, but don't you be the one to do it, basically. And he says, drink. Dost thou know me so little, Hester Prynne? Are my purposes want to be so shallow? Even if I imagine a scheme of vengeance, what could I do better from my object than to let thee live, than to let thee medicines against all harm and peril of life, so that the burning shame may still blaze upon thy bosom? He said, look, the worst punishment that I can give you is to keep you alive as long as I possibly can, so that you have to go on wearing your scarlet letter around for longer in your life. Then, so she drinks it, and then near the bottom of that page, they kind of start to talk through what happened. And first of all, he apologizes to her, right? And he's acknowledging that he probably shouldn't have married her, and he should have realized that as an older, not so good-looking dude, marrying a younger, very beautiful woman, that probably wasn't going to work, especially since she never even pretended to like him at all. So he says, it was my folly and thy weakness, I, a man of thought, the bookworm of great libraries, a man already in decay, having given my best years to feed the hungry dream of knowledge. So he spent his whole life studying. He's like, and I kind of missed my chance to have real love with somebody. What had I to do with your youth and beauty like thine own? Misshapen from my birth hour, how could I delude myself with the idea that the intellectual gifts might veil physical deformity in a young girl's fancy? Nay, from the moment when we came down the old church steps together, a married pair, I might have beheld the bale fire of the scarlet letter blazing at the end of our path. He said, I should have just seen this coming, right? And I could have almost seen this coming from the time we walked down the steps from the church after we were married, that this was where we're going to end up. And Hester, to kind of defend herself a little bit, says, Thou knowest, said Hester, for, depressed as she was, she could not endure this last stab at the token of her shame. Thou knowest that I was frank with thee. I felt nor love nor feigned any. She's like, look, I didn't even pretend to love you, right? I don't love you. I never did, and I never pretended to. And he says, true, it was my folly. And then she says, I have greatly wronged thee. We have greatly wronged each other, answered he. Mine was the first wrong, when I betrayed thy budding youth into a false and unnatural relation with my decay. But between thee and me, the scale hangs fairly balanced. But Hester, the man lives who has wronged us both. Who is he? So this is where we start to see who Chillingsworth is. Now, I think Chillingsworth is an awesome character. Okay, he's evil and gets increasingly evil throughout the book, but at least he's determined about it, right? He's upfront about being evil, kind of, as much as he can be anyway. He is upfront with about being evil to Hester anyway, and he's got a goal and he's going to go for it. Now, she says, ask me not, thou shalt never know. She's not going to give it up, and he says, never, sayest thou, rejoining he with a smile of dark and self-relying intelligence, never know him. Believe me, Hester, there are few things, whether in the outward world or, to a certain depth, in the invisible sphere of thought, few things hidden from a man who devotes himself earnestly and unreservedly to the solution of a mystery. He basically said, it doesn't matter what you try to do, it doesn't matter what anyone does, I will find out who this person is. It says, Thou wilt not reveal his name? Not the less he is mine, resumed he, with a look of confidence as if destiny were at one with him. He bears no letter of infamy wrought into his garment, as thou dost, but I shall read it on his heart. Now, I want you to remember this little bit, okay? He said, that whoever the father is not wearing anything outwardly, any clothing to identify him as the father. But he can read that on his heart. Now, I think you can read that a couple different ways. Reading that on someone's heart could be through talking to them, right? You're kind of reading their heart. But it could also be more of a physical thing, right? And we'll come back to that idea. Then she says, Thy acts are like mercy, but thy words interpret thee as terror. One thing, that wast my wife, I would enjoin upon thee, continued the scholar. Thou hast kept my secret of thy paramour, keep likewise mine. So what he said is, my only request is this, don't tell anyone who I am. Breathe not to the human soul that thou did ever call me husband. Here, on this wild outskirt of the earth, I shall pitch my tent. For elsewhere, a wanderer and isolated from human interest, I find myself here, a woman, a man, a child, amongst whom and myself there exist these close ligaments. Now, in the last page of this, she says, Wherefore dost thou desire it? Inquired Hester. Why not announce thyself openly and cast me off at once? It may be, he replied, because I will not encounter the dishonor that besmirches the husband of the faithless woman, or maybe for other reasons. So he said it might be that I'm worried I'm not going to be able to find the dude if my name gets out there, and it may be that I have my own reasons. Let therefore thy husband be to the world as one already dead, and whom no tidings shall ever come. Recognize me not by word, by sign, by look. Breathe not the secret above all to the man thou wottest of. Shouldst thou fail me in this, beware. His fame, his position, his life will be in my hands. Beware. So he says to her, look, this is kind of the blackmail piece. If you say anything about this, I basically am going to own that person, and my life will be entirely in my hands. Now, he asks her before the end of this chapter if she sees she has to wear the scarlet letter even at night in her dreams. And he gives her this smile, and she says, Why dost thou smile at me so? Inquired Hester, troubled at the expression in his eyes. Art thou like the black man that haunts the brown forest above us? Now, we're going to see this in a number of Puritan books, referring to the devil as the black man, which obviously is just straight up racist. Anyway, hast thou enticed me into a bond that will prove the ruin of my soul? Not thy soul, he answered with another smile. Not thine. So she says, Are you going to ruin my soul? Is this going to be the ruin of my soul? And he says, Not your soul. And he's implying that someone's soul is going to get ruined in this, but it's not going to be hers or his. Chapter 5, Hester at the needle. Now, here's the thing. So with this punishment, Hester lucked out that she has one of the few jobs that women were allowed to do, and that she's good enough at being able to do one of those handful of jobs that she can support herself, right? As kind of an outcast from society, the fact that she can make money to support her own self means that she can live in a cabin kind of outside of town a little bit, right? If she didn't have that skill, then she'd resort to begging, I guess, or at least being dependent upon the charity of the town, which in a lot of ways would bind her to the town a lot more, right? She wouldn't have nearly as much freedom and flexibility because she would be so much more dependent on these people. This way, it also affords her an opportunity to do a lot of charitable work, right? She does not keep most of the money that she earns. She makes clothing for people who are less fortunate, and no matter how rude they are to her, because frequently they are, she doesn't say anything back. And she's just very gracious, and like it was mentioned in the last week, Hester almost becomes like a religious figure. She basically devotes her life to good and to helping people who are less fortunate. Now, going on, page 75, the beginning of chapter 5 kind of starts with a question, or at least a statement. It may seem marvelous that with the world before her, kept by no restrictive clause of her condemnation within the limits of the Puritan settlement, so remote and so obscure, free to return to her birthplace or to any other European land, that there hide her character and identity under a new exterior. So it's weird that, or some people might think it's weird that with everywhere in the world to go, no one's holding or forcing her to stay in Boston, right? She could just leave. She could go into the wilderness. She could go back to England, that she doesn't go, right? And that she chooses to stay there. And it says, her soul, her ignominy, and were the roots which she had struck in the soil. So as soon as she had that sin there, She's kind of bound to this place. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, she felt like the place of her sin should be the place of her redemption. This is where she needs to make amends for the badness that she's done. And then also, it said, it may be that another feeling kept her within the within the scene and pathway that had been so fatal. There trod the feet of one with whom she deemed herself connected in a union, that, unrecognized on earth, would bring them together before the bar of final judgment, and make that their marriage altar of joint futurity, of endless retribution. So, the other reason is that the dude's still here. Right, and even if she can't talk to the father, right, she knows he's in town, and she still has hopes that at some point, whether it's in the afterlife or at some point in this life, she will actually get to be with that person, which is kind of sad, actually. Now, going on, so we talked about at the start of this chapter how fortunate it was that she could sew so well, right, because it allowed her to make a living and to have a lot more freedom and autonomy in her life, and it also allowed her to make the letter the way she wanted to, right? Now, this has a couple important things to it. If you were ashamed of your punishment or your sin, right, and you were tasked with making the way that looks, my guess is you would make it kind of dull or drab or small, or so it would stand out as little as possible, right? And some of the women that we talked about on Friday in chapters 2 and 3 who were complaining about the punishment or the punishment not being severe enough also complained about the way the letter looks. The fact that she makes it look so beautiful and so ornate and so bright red and just stand out to everybody says something about how she feels about her punishment and her sin, right? If not pride, there's something there, right? Because she's not ashamed of it. And it's a little bit of a political statement, the way she made the letter look. Plus, since she is a seamstress and makes her money sewing, having an example of her work on her chest all the time walking around is a little bit of an advertisement for her sewing services, right? Going on, it talks about how she spent very little money on herself, and it said, Hester sought not to acquire anything beyond a subsistence of the plainest and most aesthetic description for herself and a simple abundance for her child. Her own dress was the coarsest materials and the most somber hue, with only that one ornament, the scarlet letter, which it was on her doom to wear. The child's attire, on the other hand, was distinguished by a fanciful, or might we say, a fantastic ingenuity, which served, indeed, to heighten the airy charm that began early to develop itself in the little girl, but which appeared to also have a deeper meaning. We shall speak further of it hereafter. So, especially as the daughter starts to grow up, Mom is going to dress her in a very kind of cool, fancy way. Very bright colors, very ornate. It's the way she designs the clothing that her daughter are going to wear is very much in the style of the Scarlet Letter, right? Now, the child is going to be an interesting character, and when I first read the book and didn't like it all that much, the daughter was my favorite part. We'll find out more about her in the next coming chapters, but people in the town whisper about her being evil on something or on some level, or having some of Mom and the passion from the relationship passed down to the daughter, right? And especially since daughter doesn't know who the father is, right? And is wondering about that. She's a very interesting, cool, creative, kind of a little bit weird kid that we'll find out more about. Lastly, near the end of this chapter, Hester is experiencing something that Abigail did a little bit. So when Abigail and Proctor met at the beginning of the play, right, and they hadn't seen each other since the affair, and she gives that little speech about how Proctor taught her what Puritan settlement was really like, right, and all the Christian women and their covenanted men, and all these really well-respected people saying, don't do naughty stuff, and then as soon as there wasn't anyone around to see what they were doing, all of those people would do naughty stuff, right, which kind of points out the hypocritical nature of it. What has happened to Hester is because she has sinned, right, and owned it, right, as she walks around, she can start to sense sin in other people, right? So it's a little bit different than Abigail, but it's the same idea. But sometimes, once in many days, or perchance in many months, she felt an eye, a human eye, upon the ignominious brand that seemed to give a momentary relief, as if half of her agony were shared. The next instant, back it all rushed again, with still a deeper throb of pain, for in that brief interval she had sinned anew, had Hester sinned alone. It said, if connected, it now and then appeared to Hester, if altogether fancy, it nevertheless too potent to be resisted, she felt or fancied then that the Scarlet Letter had endowed her with a new sense. She shuddered to believe, yet could not help believing, that it gave her a sympathetic knowledge of the hidden sin in others' hearts. So, because she understands what sin is, because she's experienced it, she can sense it in other people, no matter how hard they're trying to hide it. So it says, sometimes the red infamy upon her breast would give a sympathetic throb as she passed near a venerable minister or magistrate, the model of piety and justice, to whom the age of antique reverence looked up to as a mortal man in fellowship with angels. So sometimes walking around her with her head down, she just feels this like warmth on her chest or burning on her chest or throb. It's something to do with the letter, right? And she just has this feeling like there's something evil here. And she looks up and it's a minister. Right? And that could have been Paris. That could have been, I mean, it wasn't Paris, but a similar idea, right? A minister who's not all that good. Again, mystic sisterhood would assert itself as she met the sanctified frown of some matron who, according to the rumor of all her tongues, had kept cold snow within her bosom throughout her life. That unsunned snow in the matron's bosom and the burning shame on Hester Prynne's, what had the two in common? So even people that she wouldn't suspect of doing passionate or sinful things, she kind of gets the vibe that they have been. And then it said, O fiend, whose talisman was that faintest symbol, which would be Satan, right? Wouldst thou leave nothing, whether in old age or youth, for this poor sinner to revere? Such loss of faith is one of the saddest results of sin. And her point is that the result of this taught her is that most people do bad stuff, even the people who are supposed to be good, right? And losing that knowledge was a really difficult thing for her to lose. Okay, so you're going to read chapter 6 and chapter 7 for tomorrow. I should be back tomorrow, and we'll talk then. Bye.